Proteus Motion is a sports science lab in a box. It's a completely different modality of training and something that you can't replicate with any other machine. We've proven through various laboratory testing that the muscle activation you get from three-dimensional resistance compared to existing methods produces much more muscle activation, giving you a more efficient workout. Anytime you move the machine, it directly opposes your motion. The hardware takes a lot of CAD, and the CAD is really where SOLIDWORKS comes in. We needed surface modeling, we needed more advanced features, we needed Hole Wizard, we needed things like that. We were in COVID times. I found out about the 3D Experience version of SOLIDWORKS at that point. And once I saw what was being built, I was like, okay, this is exactly what we need. We needed some type of cloud-based platform, and that it's running SOLIDWORKS is the best of both worlds.
We got really good at being able to work together remotely through the platform. It's great to be able to open up design together, look through it, and kind of go through everything live. The capabilities of SOLIDWORKS are pretty limitless for us in terms of the modeling, the drawing, of course, and then the management side of things.
Something that's available in SOLIDWORKS that helps to alleviate the stress in my day would be being able to manage that lifecycle stuff right from the side panel. So I'm in a model and I can make a change, I can save it, I can get that little check mark that it's saved to the cloud, and I can let Paul know, like, hey, model's good, and then he's got every up-to-date change that I've made in the last 5-10 minutes on that model.
We needed rendering capabilities and FEA capabilities.
FEA simulation has definitely been a huge help for us, as you can imagine, and having professional athletes on this machine, it undergoes a lot of force.
There's probably 300 unique parts in this, and then each one is used multiple times. So with simpler CAD platforms, that just breaks them, and then it also gets really confusing with mates and constraints and things like that, which is kind of another reason why I liked SOLIDWORKS, is it worked much better with larger assemblies than kind of what we were using beforehand.
It's just been that much easier with my collaboration with Paul, especially those drawings in the beginning, getting those done as fast as possible so that we can really start working with an external manufacturer.
When I think about where Proteus is going next, I, one, see a continued growth of machines across the country. I also see the ability for us to make some really cool design changes to it that we haven't been able to focus on just because small team. SOLIDWORKS is going to help us in that journey and seeing how they play out on the product through the model.
We're always going to make improvements, even things down to like our packaging and how the user experience of unboxing it gets. All of those things we design in SOLIDWORKS, it's going to have a huge effect on everything for us moving forward for getting a better customer experience.
Okay, so now we've been introduced to Proteus. Let's use the Proteus apparatus to show what's new in SOLIDWORKS 2025. Now, this is a new kind of format for GSC. In the past, we've done in-person, big everything at once type of events, and we still may end up doing a couple of those depending on how things schedule out. But initially here, and to make it as easy for as many people as possible to attend the What's New sessions, we're trying this podcast format. So this is a 7-episode series. This first one is all about the 3D modeling. Now, one thing I'm going to kind of highlight also, again, I've been doing this for a long time, and what's kind of been happening over the last probably couple of years actually, but even more accelerated now, is that we're instead of just putting bug fixes in service packs, which we now call functional deliveries or FDs, we're now seeing Dassault SOLIDWORKS add performance updates and functional enhancements throughout the year. So when 2024 came out about a year ago, we call it the GA or SP0, but general availability. When that came out about a year ago, and between then and now, basically, there have been over 200 enhancements. Again, these are functionality enhancements, things you'll see in this What's New, but they're actually were delivered along the way this year under a different service pack or a functional delivery. So, we're doing still update kind of thing and what's new, and there's a lot of stuff that is what's new, completely new in 2025, but there have been delivery of new things along the way. So that's a new kind of mode for some of us who have been using SOLIDWORKS for a long time, and it's actually kind of keeps things fresh and new and improved, not just waiting a whole year for everything to happen at once. So just be aware of that. Now, I also want to point out not just 200 enhancements, but another number, which is 33. 33 is the number of releases now that we've had of SOLIDWORKS. So not necessarily the number of years of SOLIDWORKS. SOLIDWORKS was first released in 1995. So it's 29 years of SOLIDWORKS out there, but early on we had 2 major releases in the same year for a number of years there. So this is the 33rd major release of SOLIDWORKS. That's correct. Now, in addition to that, there's another meaning personally for that number, in that this is my 33rd year at GSC. So yeah, while I predate SOLIDWORKS and GSC predates SOLIDWORKS, having come to the company in 92, I've completed 32 years. I'm in my 33rd year at GSC. So it's kind of one of those things where some of you have been around for the bulk of that time, and every once in a while we kind of look around and say, wow, things have gotten pretty awesome and have changed quite a bit. And you'll see even in 2025, it's not slowing down at all. And I just want to say thank you all on behalf of GSC and on behalf of myself. I want to thank you all for your business as we continue this journey from what SOLIDWORKS started out as just a single version, just a one-trick pony kind of thing in in 3D design into where it's come today. All right, so let's go ahead and actually talk about our topics again. Short and sweet for just these podcast things. We're going to talk about what's new in parts, sheet metal and weldments, and assemblies. So to start with, let's talk about parts. There are some nice little behind the scene things that make some things go faster, like with cosmetic thread. Some of you longtime people might notice Z-Up is a thing now. We have some enhancement to some old favorites like chamfer tool, variable radius tool. We're getting some additional diagnostic tools and some repair functionality that's really nice that you'll like, as well as a new way and some streamlined workflows for things like measuring a projected area of a 3D part. So let's get into it. First of all, we're going to talk about just when you have a lot of cosmetic threads, like in the parts in this assembly, you should notice a significant increase in performance just working with those. When I take a look at this assembly and I want to make a multi-body part for manufacturing, notice we have Z-Up as an option for new parts that are created out of our new template. So this is a multi-body part. I'm going to do some chamfers on here. You'll notice in 2025, when we do a chamfer, we can now have the same selection accelerators that we've enjoyed for years with the fill command now available on the chamfer command. I'm going to do a new thing called a groove bead between these two bodies. I'm just going to pick these two faces and have it put that in there. We'll explore that a little bit more later on in our session here. And when I save this, I want to first defeature it. And new in 2025, we can do the silhouette defeature method, which is kind of the preferred faster method for parts, even multi-body parts. Whereas before, we can only do that with assembly. So the multi-body part, we can go through and say we want to just do bounding box or cylinders. You can see how it's going to build up in the right-hand window, a preview of what we're doing, polygon outline, a little bit more detail. So we can kind of go through each one of these things. We can group them together to do multiple bodies at once or individually, treat them differently. And when we're done with this, we can either save it as an external file or we can create it as a new configuration of the part we already have. So silhouette defeature for parts is new in 2025. Now let's take a look at the performance evaluation. And we can see here now that we get the face count and the graphics triangle count right away. So I look at this as like 26,000. That's an awful lot for a part like that, and that's because someone moved the slider on the high side of the test site graphics. This is just graphics only. This has nothing to do with the surfaces themselves, but it does increase the overhead for the system. So now we got this under 10,000. Looking at the curvature, we have kind of a pinch point with this variable radius fillet. This is one of my favorite new things in 2025. We now have the continuous edge blend. It just makes using variable radius fillets, I think, easier for everybody to get that functionality of varying a radius, but also being smooth and easy to make a nice looking fillet. Now we have this sketch pattern that's 18% of the rebuild time, and it's based on this sweep feature. What is that? Well, someone cut threads in this thing, which we don't want to do. I can delete that sweep easy enough, but sometimes you're in a situation where you have a feature that is past the rebuild, and you don't want to just rebuild it and wait for it to delete it. Now you don't have to. You can delete features even if they haven't been rebuilt. So that's a really nice functionality there. Let's go ahead and select all these faces, and this is the measure command now. I'm gonna select all these faces, and I'm gonna select the plane. And as part of the measure command now, we can just project outside area right onto there and get that projected area straight away. So before to do that, you'd have to make a sketch and project the edges and measure that. Now you can just do it straight away. Whenever a situation comes up where you have a dangling dimension or relation in a 2D sketch, you know the drill. You go in and edit it, you look and see what's wrong, you go ahead and find the red handle maybe and drag it on to like what was missing, which you can still do. But now we can use the magic auto repair sketch relation or dimension command, which if you look at this under display delete relations, it's also available. I can look at it, say find a replacement for any of the dangling ones, or I can just repair all dangling. Like all the auto repair commands, I always recommend do it first. If it does it the way you want, you're good. If it doesn't, you can help it. Well, you know, you got some help there anyway. So again, as you know, we're talking about workflows and speeding things up. One of the things that does happen in modeling is things break, things need to be repaired and things like that, mates and sketches and that. Where you've seen over the last several years, SOLIDWORKS, you guys pay attention to that and making those workflows faster and as automatic as possible. We can now also do a better job converting mesh bodies to standard BREP. And in fact, for things like planes, cylinders, cones, and spherical faces, we can do that automatically now. You don't have to click on them discretely and do them individually. Also, beam lattice, we have some X-apps and some other tools out there that create these lattices. We can now actually import those into SOLIDWORKS as different kinds of geometry, whether it's a parasolid or a graphics or a wireframe mesh, you can do that now. And I know a lot of people have asked about this over the years. Yes, we can now finally do linear and circular patterns of reference geometry. So you can pattern planes, you can pattern axes. Finally, we can do that. When you're doing a move body command, when you're translating and rotating, you can now use things like equations or configurations or flip the direction with the dimension as part of those translation or rotation actions. We can now generate a curve through XYZ points at a specific, i.e. usually custom, coordinate system as its origin. So that's something that a lot of people have asked for. You can do that. And when you do that, you can also update the curve and then use the reload button to update it as you go. And then here's a nice little thing, but you know, it's one of those things that like if you do it a lot, it's kind of annoying. We can now, when you're doing the convert entities command in a sketch, you can now just right away say, oh, by the way, this is for construction. So before you convert the entities, then you had to go in and grab them and change them for construction. Now you can do that in the convert command right away. All right, so that's a lot of what's new in parts and features. Now let's go ahead and look at specifically some new things in sheet metal and weldments. Things like maintaining and distributing properties and cut lists are way easier now. Bend notches are a big crowd favorite when I've seen this presented before in different places. Being able to just versatility with the standard sheet metal commands, the groove beads you kind of saw already a little bit here. And then there's some behind the scenes just perform in terms of things even like folding and unfolding when you have a lot of cuts inside of bends and things like that. So we look at this mounting yoke here. I'm going to go ahead and look at the cut list properties. I'm going to add a new property. It comes up, okay. I want to add one called process, and I'm going to put it in water jet to the first value. Now what we can do is we can copy those to, in this case, I'll say all the other cut list entities. So now I just copied that new property called process and that value called water jet to all of them in one shot. Now I will, some of these, the value is not going to be water jet, it's going to be something else. So in this case, I'll say change to bandsaw. I'm going to copy that and then copy it to not everything, but to certain other items. So I can copy new colorless properties everywhere, and then I can also copy variations in value really, really quickly with these copy to options right in the dialog there. Very handy. Looking at this bracket and flattening it out, sometimes in the shop floor, it's hard for people to exactly line these things up because the bend line is just kind of, you know, virtual there. So what we can do now is automatically just put bend notches in on the ends here. And you can make them triangular or circular or square notches, can change the size. And it just helps people on the shop floor line these things up in the press brake so they get them bang on right away. Also, tab and slot, very useful, enhanced in the last number of years, but there's some often asked for enhancements along the lines of alignment and centering. So now when I offset, I can say equal offset to both sides, which makes it easier to do what I want to do there. And then I'm going to have the same item in the same new group here. And instead, I'm going to vary this a little differently. So I'm going to do a center align, which is also new, and just align it center, 7 millimeters either way. And then, oh, by the way, in this case, I'm going to skip the middle one. So I'm basically making it so it's keyed and easy, you know, to orient the right way when you put these together for welding. Looking at the flat pattern, you can see we have all that already there, including those bend notches. Doing an edge flange is really easy. Just grab an edge and move it down. You can grab more than one edge if you want to. It's in the same feature though, so they're going to be the same length. Until now, I can now toggle on multi-length flange. So I'm doing an edge flange, but I can say, well, the inside one is going to be not as long as the outside one. Let's go ahead and change the radius a little bit and tighten it up. You'll also notice here when I look at edit flange profile that it's no longer underdefined because the flange length is actually driven by the edge flange dialog itself. So we don't have to worry about that kind of thing in some companies where, you know, that's a flag. Got some gap here. I'm going to add the new groove bead, and this is how it works. You just basically pick a couple sets of faces here, and you basically can define a weld symbol here as well. They'll come in drawings if you want to, or if you're doing MBD now in 2025, you'll see that next week, how that works. And because these groove beads are done as separate bodies, it's really easy to mirror them. And remember, in the last couple of releases of SOLIDWORKS, we've added some enhancements. So I can mirror in 2 directions at the same time. Remember, the recent enhancement, you can hit the Q key on your keyboard to bring up your reference geometry on screen, so you can pick the right face and the front face or planes there, and then mirror all those in one shot really quick. So a lot of nice little enhancements to sheet metal in SOLIDWORKS 2025. I particularly like the enhancements to the tab and slot and also the edge flange. You know, I do that a lot. So also when you're doing complex profiles in weldments now, you can allow protrusion during planar body trim, so you can have that more complex, like you have that 80-20 kind of stuff going on there. You can see how we can make a nice trim there. And then in using structure systems, we have some nice improvements in that in general. For example, you can now mirror a pattern structure system or pattern a mirror structure system, as well as there's a better kind of UI kind of wizard step through for corner treatments. You get that stage. And then something I particularly like, because I tend to use a lot of connection elements now, especially for like end caps, is you can now use those as trim members when you're doing this, which kind of saves against additional steps to get that all done. So some nice enhancements to sheet metal and weldments and structure systems in 2025. Now let's take a look at a whole bunch of enhancements in SOLIDWORKS assembly modeling. Now, some of these are focused on performance because SOLIDWORKS is never fast enough. It can never be too fast. So we have some performance enhancements along the lines of enhancements in the performance tools we have, as well as giving you more information easier so you can see things. And then also one of the things I love, 2 things I love actually, are display state table and document groups. They're super awesome. And then also copy with mates. You'll see here that now that you can copy with mates with reckless abandon. Doesn't matter what kind of mates they are, they're all gonna copy with mates just fine. So taking a look at the top level of the Proteus here, when I look at the performance evaluation tool, we now have more information, some additional sections here that gives us information that we didn't have before, like how many documents are in a previous version of SOLIDWORKS, so you can see that right away. And then also graphics triangles. So I can see in here that anything over 5,000 triangles, I'm going to get flagged, and I can even open them directly. So what the heck is 2 million triangles? What part is that? I look at here and I say, oh, somebody modeled a machine screw, but they modeled it with high surface definition, and they modeled a thread. So that's, we'll deal with that later, huh? But that flags it out real quick. If you're using SpeedPak, it's now a lot easier to make SpeedPaks in 2025 because you can create them at the top level of the assembly and then drill down before you had to go to the bottom level and go up. Much easier that way. Also in SpeedPak, you know, when you're looking at that graphics circle to show you what's really there and what's just, you know, virtual, in SpeedPak, you now have control over the opacity. Some people don't like the stark difference between those two things, so you can change that look, make it a little more subtle if you want to. We'll go ahead and close this thing out, and let's talk about instead LDR. So large design review is one of my favorite things in SOLIDWORKS Large Assembly. You can open things in LDR, and every year they've been adding more and more functionality to it. So now 2025, when you're in LDR mode, you can use breadcrumbs and navigate your assemblies and sub-assemblies. You can also use the wonderful and probably underused in my estimation, the component preview window to grab things. And amazingly, when you're in LDR now in 2025, you can actually do interference detection. Now this is at the graphics level, so it's not for like super tight tolerances, but for most things at this large level, it's gonna be just fine. So it grabs and sees that there's a interference between the hole in that guard and the handle shaft. So I'll go in here, use breadcrumbs to open it up directly. And we can see here that we just need to add a little more clearance. So we'll knock the diameter up by couple of millimeters to take care of that issue. So again, more and more seamless between working with LDR and fully resolved in terms of the modes you work with. And by the way, you can go ahead and use the breadcrumb to find a subassembly and open it up in its own window, fully resolved if you want to go right there. Again, it's just those UI tweaks you've had that you just gotta kind of try them and you'll find out how useful they are. Now, I have a bunch of display states. Display states are great, and they're also easy to make, which sometimes we do lose track of them. In 2025, we have this awesome display state table. It's automatically made and maintained for you. This is just like what we did last year in 2024 for configurations, but now we have one for display states. So I can see what all display states are. I can actually modify, you know, what's showing and hidden and whatnot in each display state. I can try it out by applying it, seeing what those changes are. And then if I want to, I can either okay it and keep those changes, or I can cancel and get out of it. So a great enhancement in 2025 that just will help you wrangle your display states. I have 3 documents open. I'm gonna create a document group, so that way when I go home and come back in the next morning, instead of going each document opening up separately, I can go to document groups, pick the document group I just made, and then open all those files in one shot. So that's another just everyday time saver thing I love in 2025. Look at the boom arm here, and I have a display state exposing what we're looking at for a belt clearance. And the belt is just a part that's a surface. So now in 2025, we can include surface bodies in interference checking, which is great because I tend to use surfaces for things like belts and things like that. And now I can actually include them in interference checking, which is just a great time saver. Now looking at down here, I have a couple of these sets of fasteners, and they're in there with a slot mate. I'm going to now copy with mates, and the copy with mates command is now unbridled. You can copy with mates and whatever the mate they are. In this case, these are slot mates, and I'll just go ahead and copy that set of fasteners to these two, and those are slot mates that are copied. And again, I can go in there, individually control them, set them to center or whatever I want to do. But again, now you don't have to worry about that. So say to this monitor stand, and we have this sort of, we have like a limit mate, and we have a profile center mate on this guy. I can take that subassembly, copy with mates, and then again, find the face I want to have for the limit mate, and find the other face for the profile center mate. Again, those are advanced mates. No problem. I can copy that over there and take that whole subassembly and make that instance, and you'll see that the advanced mates are copied over just like they behave in the original. So that's a time saver as well. So no more of the limitation there. When I make a new assembly, I want to make a facility layout. It's going to be Z up. So when we do this, use the new Z-up option for our new template, and we'll start putting it in there. Now, this is a Z-up. You see, notice in the lower corner, Z is up, and the planes are named correctly. I'm going to drop these SOLIDWORKS models in here. They were created Y-up, so they're going to be on their side, which makes total sense. But because I'm using the new, from last year, float component on insert, they're just floating out in space. So I can easily go in here and get the top plane for Z-up that's correctly oriented and named, and then just go ahead and make these bottom faces to that plane so we can set up our Z-up facility layout, which we can then easily share with people using more architectural tools down the road. Couple other notes here. When you're using the assembly visualization tool, we're including now 3D Experience, SOLIDWORKS connected type of attributes. You can define colors for specific values. You want to flag a certain value, a separate color, and we support more properties than ever before. When you're creating a subassembly, so you have an assembly and you're like, you know what? I want to grab these like 4 parts and make them their own subassembly, and you do that on the fly, okay? In SOLIDWORKS 2025, when you do that, you now will have the ability to specify what the origin of that subassembly is. Yeah, you can either reuse the parent assembly's origin, or you can use the origin of one of the parts, and the way it figures it out, because again, you might have 20 parts or whatever, the first component you select that when you create this, that's the one that's going to give you the option for. So you want to be a little mindful of that if you're going to do that. Or you can just manually select the subassembly origin and with a pointer or vertex inside the model itself. When you have folders in your assemblies, you're kind of organizing your tree. If there's anything that's under constrained, in other words, not fully mated, it's going to show that minus sign at the folder level. So if it's rolled up, you still know that there's components underneath there that aren't fully constrained. And then also when you're doing sketch assembly level sketches, you can now assign different that they stand out and they don't just kind of fade in the gray background. If you're doing reorganized, that property manager has been kind of reorganized itself, actually improved to make it more clear when you're doing components with extended assembly trees underneath them. So it's going to, again, show you very clearly which components you're going to move, the destination assembly, and then also features that will be affected. It'll show all that as well. And a nice, simple, separate dialogues there, or parts of the dialogue. And then when you're doing assembly of mass properties, it's now going to speed up the calculation. So if there's subassemblies and, or I say parts and bodies that already have mass property information in them, it's going to use those instead of running the calculation on all those things too. So it's going to leverage that to make that a faster process. You can now measure in the measure tool angular rotation between different coordinate systems. So that's a new thing. And then also when you do a component of a pattern of components, okay, you can now link the display state of the pattern components to the seed that the component you use to create the component pattern. So now you have those options. You can synchronize that with display states. It's a separate option under the synchronized configuration. So some nice enhancements to assemblies as well. What I'm going to also just mention here, when you're talking Z-up, that is for new files, right? We're not like going back and changing Z-up and existing parts and assemblies. That would be chaos. So what we're doing is there's a new template in 2025. So again, this is for new stuff going forward, right? It's like templates or copies or things you copy into files, right? So in 2025, we have new templates for parts and assemblies. The default templates now have a Z-up option for them. So if you want to create your own custom templates that have a Z-up option, you will basically need to create new templates, custom templates from those new default Z-up option templates, okay, if that makes any sense. Again, this is not retroactive. I mean, imagine the chaos that would ensue if we could even do that, which we can't because the file's already cooked. But if you want to do that, And maybe you're like, hey, why up is the SOLIDWORKS standard anyway, so we don't care. Been doing it for 20 years. But if there's like a certain template you want to make for like, okay, let's make for a part that's going to be kicked out for machining, or an assembly that's going to be specifically for facility layout that's going to be shared with, like, you know, our partners using AEC tools or whatever, you can now make a new template using those. You have to make your own and custom one, but it is now an option. So that is, again, this is a quick hitting podcast format, half-hour kind of time frame of what's new in 3D modeling for SOLIDWORKS 2025. So I do want to point out that, again, this has been the first of 7 in our podcast series. I'm going to be doing episode 2, which is documentation. So all the stuff that's, or a lot of stuff that's new in drawings, as well as model-based definition, or MBD. Anyway, documentation next week, drawings, mostly drawings, some MBD. That's the subject of the next podcast. With that, I'd like to thank you all for coming to SOLIDWORKS What's New 2025 podcast, and we'll see you next week. Until then, have a great week and weekend.